I want to paint you a picture of what Cleveland could actually look like if this offseason goes the way the evidence is suggesting it might. Not a fantasy version, not the kind of wishful projection that has surrounded this franchise like a persistent fog for 2 decades of false starts and failed investments. A real, grounded, here are the specific moves and here is why they actually work version. Because when you lay out everything the Browns currently have positioned in front of them, the draft capital, the quarterback situation trending with remarkable consistency in a single direction, the defensive foundation anchored by one of the genuinely dominant players in professional football, and a free agent pass rusher who hasn't been signed yet, the picture that forms is legitimately different from anything Cleveland has been able to say about itself in recent memory. And I think it deserves to be examined seriously rather than dismissed as premature optimism. Start where everything always has to start, which is the quarterback, because the entire logic of everything else this offseason depends on the organizational commitment to Shedeur Sanders being real rather than performative, and every observable signal from inside that building suggests it is. Todd Monken has not announced a starter. He's done something more informative than announcing one. He structured day 1 of the offseason program, with Shedeur taking first-team reps. He described the competition publicly as unequal in its rep distribution, with one quarterback positioned to receive more time in pass skeleton, more time in team periods, more accumulated practice with the personnel he'll be executing alongside when the games count. The open competition language exists for external management purposes, but the operational architecture underneath that language is already organized around a specific outcome. The building knows what the evaluation is producing. The question is when the public declaration catches up to the internal reality. The statistical context surrounding that quarterback situation deserves full examination because I think it's essential for understanding why the draft decisions that follow matter as much as they do. Cleveland finished last in total QBR last season. Their quarterbacks faced pressure on 39% of their dropbacks, the worst rate in the entire league. Pass rushers were making direct contact with their quarterback on more than a quarter of all dropback attempts. I need you to actually sit with those numbers before moving past them because they're not just describing poor performance. They're describing a structural environment that was never designed to give anyone under center a fair evaluation. When a quarterback faces that kind of constant structural hostility on every possession throughout an entire season, you're not learning what he can do. You're learning what he can endure. Any evaluation conducted inside those conditions tells you far more about the environment than it does about the player. That reality shapes everything that needs to happen in the draft, and it shapes why the specific sequence of moves Cleveland makes in the next several weeks will either validate or undermine the organizational commitment that every internal signal has been pointing toward. Pick 6 and 24. Those 2 selections are where organizational rhetoric either gets backed by resource allocation or quietly revealed as something less serious than it has appeared. The consensus among serious evaluators who have studied this draft class carefully is not complicated when you state it directly. Left tackle at 6, receiver at 24. And the logic behind that specific sequence matters as much as the positions themselves, so I want to develop it fully rather than just asserting it as obvious. Left tackle at 6 is not preference. It's not one reasonable interpretation among several. It's a necessity derived from where this draft class is actually structured and what happens to teams that try to address the position later. The people who have done the most rigorous analysis of this class are saying clearly the tackle depth drops off sharply after the top tier. You cannot sit at 24 and assume a quality starting left tackle will still be there. That is a position in this draft where the window is early, where the quality that changes a franchise's offensive infrastructure is concentrated at the top, and where waiting to manufacture a solution at pick 24 introduces a level of uncertainty that is genuinely unnecessary when the asset to prevent it exists at pick 6. If Cleveland has legitimate conviction about the quality available at 6, and every indication suggests they do, you secure that protection and you remove the uncertainty. You do not gamble with the foundational infrastructure of a young quarterback's developmental environment. Then at 24, the attention turns outside, because the other structural problem Shedeur faces, one that the pressure numbers document in one dimension but doesn't fully capture, is that the receiving infrastructure around him doesn't force defensive coordinators to make the coverage distribution choices that open space for an offense. Jerry Jeudy is a genuine professional receiver. His route running is real. His ability to create separation at the intermediate level is real. I'm not dismissing what he brings, but Jeudy does not scare a defensive coordinator vertically. He He does not force pre-snap safety decisions that change the geometry of the entire defense and create the downstream effects that an offense needs. When a defense can commit its secondary resources downhill without worrying about getting burned over the top, they can bracket intermediate routes, load the short areas, and create coverage environments that make every throw a young quarterback attempts more contested than it needs to be. An offense with a genuine vertical threat forces a different calculation. Safeties have to honor the deep ball before the snap. Corners can't play as tight. The entire coverage distribution changes, and those changes open the intermediate and underneath areas that a Munkin-influenced offense uses most effectively. Cleveland needs to draft that player at 24, the receiver who forces defenses to play honest with their alignment because ignoring him costs you completions and yards that cannot be recovered. Give Shedeur Sanders a weapon that changes the pre-snap picture, and the offense becomes qualitatively different than what we saw last season. Now let me spend serious time on Joey Bosa, because I think the conversation around him has been conducted in ways that miss the most important point about what his presence in Cleveland would actually mean. The honest assessment of where Bosa is as an individual player is not difficult if you look at it without sentimentality. He is not the player he was during his dominant years in Los Angeles. Age, the cumulative physical wear that every elite pass rusher absorbs across years of working against the best protection talent in the world, and durability concerns that have followed him through recent seasons. All of that shapes what he is right now. His 2025 season in Buffalo showed genuine flashes early before fading as the year progressed. That trajectory is real information and deserves honest acknowledgement. Nobody should argue that Joey Bosa in 2026 is the same force he was at his absolute peak. But here is the piece of the Bosa conversation that I think keeps getting missed. The role that exists for him in Cleveland does not require him to be what he was at his peak. It requires something fundamentally different and, for his specific current profile, more achievable. Myles Garrett is already on this roster. Myles Garrett is still one of the most disruptive individual defenders in the sport, a player who commands extraordinary protection resources from every offensive coordinator who game plans against Cleveland. Tight end chips, left tackle help sliding back before the snap, running backs kept in protection rather than released into routes. Garrett draws all of that attention every single passing down because offensive coordinators cannot leave him in one-on-one situations without accepting catastrophic risk. That attention is constant, genuine, and resource-intensive for every offense that faces him. Now put a credible, experienced, technically polished pass rusher on the opposite side. Think about the picture from the opposing offensive coordinator's perspective. You have already committed your best protection resources to containing Garrett. That allocation is non-negotiable. You don't have a choice. But while all of that protection emphasis is directed at one edge of the formation, Joey Bosa is working against whoever is left on the other side without help. And Bosa, with his hand usage, his understanding of protection schemes from 15 years of studying them at the professional level, his technical sophistication in manufacturing pressure against professional tackles, does not need to be at his physical peak to be highly effective in that specific context. The pass rusher who gets clean one-on-one looks because the protection resources are focused elsewhere doesn't need maximum athletic explosion to create real problems. He needs craft, leverage, and technique. Bosa has all three in abundance, and the Garrett dynamic would deliver him the matchup conditions those tools are most effective in. The downstream effect on opposing quarterbacks is where this conversation becomes most consequential. Quarterbacks who hear pressure from two directions before the ball is even snapped process differently than quarterbacks who only have to account for one. Offensive linemen who cannot double both edge rushers make allocation decisions and accept that one of them gets a cleaner path to the pocket. Offensive coordinators watching their protection schemes fail despite adequate preparation because the scheme-resistant aspect of the problem is having two elite rushers on opposite edges simultaneously have to live with the results. That is the defensive identity Garrett and Bosa would create together, and it is the kind of identity that changes game scripts in ways that matter enormously to the development of the young quarterback on the other side of the ball. That connection between the defensive identity Cleveland could build and the developmental environment Shedeur Sanders needs is the piece I think matters most and that I want to develop carefully. Young quarterbacks don't become franchise cornerstones by surviving broken environments. They don't develop the deep, durable decision-making confidence that separates good starters from great ones by being asked to carry teams that can't create favorable conditions anywhere else. The quarterbacks who make genuine developmental leaps, who go from promising to something special across a compressed timeline, are the ones whose teams make the environment work for them, where the defense generates short fields through pressure-caused turnovers and forced punts, where the running game maintains the balanced offensive identity that prevents defenses from simply teeing off on the quarterback on every obvious passing down, where the game scripts allow a young passer to operate smart and controlled rather than desperate and frantic. Cleveland last season was the inverse of that environment in almost every measurable way. Constant pressure, limited receiving depth, a defense that couldn't consistently keep the team in games and generate the field position that takes stress off the offense. Shedeur Sanders showed genuinely remarkable things inside that environment. The 2 consecutive divisional wins at the end of the season, the Pro Bowl selection, the processing speed and competitive resilience that the independent tape evaluation later validated. All of that is real and should be credited fully. But what remarkable performance inside a broken environment tells you is not what optimal development inside a constructed environment would have produced. The bad habits that pressure-heavy environments bake into quarterbacks, the trigger that comes from panic rather than design, the forced throw because waiting is not available as an option, the frantic playing style that looks like urgency but is really just survival. Those habits don't announce themselves as problems. They develop quietly, underground, and surface later as ceilings. Cleveland's off-season decisions are the mechanism for preventing that outcome, rather than hoping Shedeur is exceptional enough to develop optimally, despite conditions that have historically worked against development. Now let me assemble the full picture, because I think the coherence of what Cleveland could be building becomes genuinely compelling when you see all the pieces in one place. Shedeur Sanders with first-team reps from day one of the offseason program. Every signal from coaches, players, and independent evaluators confirming he's the starter, posting 80% completions in 11-on-11 reps on day one of voluntary minicamp. Todd Monken with the offensive philosophy and the documented methodology. Helmet cameras for real-time processing analysis, unequal rep distribution, the full Baltimore-influenced offensive infrastructure being installed to actually develop what Shedeur's ceiling might be. Pick 6, securing the left tackle who changes the physical conditions of every dropback. Pick 24, adding the vertical threat who changes the pre-snap geometry of every defense Cleveland faces. Myles Garrett as the defensive foundation, already generating the attention and disruption that makes every other piece of the defense more effective. And Joey Bosa potentially available to become the force multiplier on the opposite edge. Not the featured player, not the centerpiece, but the experienced craftsman who makes Garrett exponentially more disruptive by giving opposing offenses 2 unsolvable problems instead of 1. That is not a team searching for an identity. That is not a franchise experimenting with directions and hoping something takes. That is an organization assembling pieces around a coherent vision that has both sides of the ball developing simultaneously in ways that support each other. The kind of vision Cleveland has not been able to describe about itself with this level of specificity or this quality of available pieces in a genuinely long time. I want to be honest about the uncertainty that remains, because professional football is unforgiving about premature declarations. The draft has to produce the right selections. The Bosa conversation has to reach terms that work financially. The quarterback competition has to conclude with the organizational clarity and completeness that the internal signals are pointing toward. Nothing is locked in before it's locked in. But here is where I honestly land on all of it when I step back and look at the total picture. The direction is established. The capital exists to execute it. The coaching staff has the vision and the stated operational conviction that makes the execution possible. The quarterback is demonstrating in daily practice that the organizational belief in him is grounded in actual competitive performance rather than projections and preferences. And the defensive asset that would make everything else work better is sitting in free agency available for the organization to claim if the will and the financial terms align. Cleveland has not had this specific combination of aligned factors available to it around a quarterback situation in a very long time. The franchise's history at this position has been the story of finding better quarterbacks while leaving everything else broken, of hoping that superior talent would overcome structural deficiency rather than constructing the structure that gives talent the environment to become something real. This offseason is different because the organization apparently understands the distinction. And if everything that's being assembled right now actually comes together the way the pieces are suggesting it might, the AFC North is going to have a significantly different conversation about Cleveland by the time October arrives.